Evidently, the foghorn makes you deaf and blind. Spoken version. I spent a day this week at an outdoor scout centre near Chorley, running crate stacking for a group of Year 4s. Children climbing a wobbling tower of milk crates in a harness. All day in the open air. Their teachers were good company between sessions. And the talk turned, as it does now, to the by-election down the road. They carried two worries at once. The first was what it would mean for these children if reform took Makerfield. The second was that Andy Burnham was using the seat to get somewhere else. Neither worry cancelled the other. Both were precise. It is the feeling of a place where the people warning you about the danger might also be using you. And you are expected to choose anyway. This Thursday, in the dark. The pits round here closed 40 years ago. The town the country looked away from in 1984 is now the hinge on which a leadership challenge, a government, and possibly the next decade of British politics turns. That is not coincidence. The places American politics forgot in the 1970s and 80s became the places that decided 2016 and 2024. The same mechanism. Different map. Different speed. Forget a place for long enough, and it stops being a backwater and becomes the front line. I want to start there. With the crates and the teachers. Not with the polling. Because they're the people this is actually about. And I want to name the instrument being used on them. It is a foghorn. And the thing about a foghorn is that it does not make you stupid. It makes you deaf and blind. I've spent enough time on water to know what a foghorn is for. One of them, in fog, is a gift. It tells you where the danger is, so you can steer away from it. But put too many of them in the same stretch of water, all sounding at once, and the sound bounces off every hard surface until you can no longer tell which direction it is coming from. The instrument, built to orient you, becomes the instrument that disorients you. You are not less intelligent in that moment. You are receiving too much signal, stripped of the one thing that made the signal worth having. Direction. That is what the digital information environment now does to political judgment. It is not a metaphor I'm reaching for to make a point sound nice. It is a description of a documented process, and it is running at 3 scales at once. First, the citizen scale. Start with the smallest and most human of them, because that is where you and I actually live. Human attention has a known bias. A single, vivid, frightening, emotionally charged event overrides statistical reality in a way that no quantity of aggregate data can reverse. One terrible thing you can picture will always weigh more than 10,000 ordinary days you cannot. This is not a flaw the foghorn invented. It is a feature of how minds work, and it was there long before the internet. What is new is an industry that has learned to find that bias, strip away the surrounding context that would normally correct it, and deliver the result to you at scale, tuned to the exact thing that will move you. The killing of Henry Nowak in Southampton last December is the clearest current example of what that does, and I want to handle it carefully because a young man is dead and his family have asked for something specific. Here is what is documented. In December, Henry Nowak, 18 years old, was stabbed to death by Vikram Digwa. When police arrived, Digwa told them a lie, that he had been the victim, that Nowak had racially abused and attacked him. The officers believed the lie. They handcuffed the dying boy. He told them he had been stabbed. He told them he could not breathe. One officer told him, on camera, that he didn't think he had been. Nowak died. In May, Digwa was convicted of murder. On the 2nd of June, Hampshire police released the body-worn footage. And the footage is as bad as that summary makes it sound. The force has referred itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. That is a real failure. A genuine, serious, institutional failure. A boy died in handcuffs because officers believed his killer's lie instead of his own words. There is nothing invented about the grievance. Hold on to that, because it is the whole point. Within hours, the foghorn had it. Tommy Robinson was addressing a rally in Southampton. Nigel Farage commended the family's dignity and then called on everyone else to respond with pure cold rage. 11 officers were injured in the protests that followed, and the case was turned, fast, toward a target it did not point at on its own. The kirpan. And through the kirpan, the entire British Sikh community. This is where the distinction that the noise is designed to drown gets quietly removed. So let me put it back. The kirpan is one of the 5 Ks, an article of faith carried by observant Sikhs. Under British law, there is no legal maximum size for it. The protection in the offensive weapons legislation does not work by length at all. It works by purpose. Carrying a blade in public requires good reason, or lawful authority. And religious observance is explicitly recognized as exactly that. A Sikh carrying a kirpan for genuine religious reasons is covered. and most British Sikhs carry a modest everyday one, a few inches, sheathed, worn under the clothes, not because the law makes them, but for the practical business of getting through airports and schools and workplaces without friction. The overwhelming majority carry lawfully. The overwhelming majority have never harmed anyone and never will. Digwa was not one of them. The court found that the large blade he used fell outside the religious defence. The prosecution argued there was no genuine religious necessity for it. The judge treated it as a large, bladed article the exemption was never meant to cover. And Digwa himself was described in court as weapons-obsessed. He was, in plain terms, breaking the law. Not because his blade exceeded some legal size. There is no such size. But because what he was doing with it was not religious observance. It was carrying a weapon, and then using it to kill. So follow what the Foghorn does with that. It takes one man who broke the law, and it uses him to argue that the law itself, the exemption that lets a peaceful community wear an article of their faith, is the danger. Reform has pledged to scrap the exemption. Restore Britain's leader and Reform's Home Affairs spokesman have both called for it to go. The move converts a single criminal act into a standing suspicion of everyone who shares the criminal's faith. 99.9% of whom were doing nothing wrong and carrying nothing unlawful. Tamanjeet Singh DC, the Labour MP who is himself Sikh, said it plainly. The kirpan was not even the weapon, and his community is being attacked over it anyway. You can see the mechanism working in real time. The Foghorn does not need to invent a single fact. The killing was real. The blade was real. The police failure was real. That reality is precisely what makes the move land. The audience cannot easily check the difference between a small lawful article of faith and a large blade carried unlawfully by a man who used religion as cover. The noise is loud enough that most of them will not try. And so a true and terrible event becomes a reason to be afraid of your Sikh neighbour, who has done nothing. And the distinction that would have stopped that lawful observance is not the same as a weapon carried with intent, gets lost in the din. That is the achievement. Not making people wrong, making them unable to receive the correction. The Foghorn does not lower your intelligence, it removes your bearings. And I want to be careful here, because the family asked for it. Mark Nowak, Henry's father, said his son's death was not about race or religion, and that he did not want it used to create further division, hatred, or tension. He held Digwa responsible for the killing, and the police responsible for how his boy was treated, and he asked the rest of us not to turn his grief into a weapon. Within days, that request was set aside, by people who found the division more useful than the grief. Remember that. The next time someone tells you they are only saying what the family would have wanted. Second, the institutional scale. Now widen it out. Because the citizen scale does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a country where the things that used to correct it have been hollowed out. The digital revolution removed the institutional filter on who could broadcast at scale, at the precise moment when post-industrial communities had the most legitimate grievances and the least capacity to do anything about them. Think about what used to sit between a person's anger and the wider world. The local paper, with an editor and a libel lawyer. The working men's club, the union branch. The church. Each of those had friction built into it. You had to turn up. You met people who disagreed with you. The information was embedded in a relationship, and the relationship carried a cost if you behaved badly. None of it was perfect, and some of it was stifling. But all of it was friction. And friction is what slows a lie down. The Foghorn has no friction. It delivers straight to the individual, in the palm of the hand. Tuned by a machine to confirm and intensify whatever already moves them. The pub's shut. The paper's closed. The branch is emptied, and into the space where there used to be came an instrument with no editor, no neighbour, and no cost. Makerfield is that space, filling in real time. The anger there is real, and it is old. Farage has called for cold rage against the explicit wishes of a grieving family. The grooming gang's material is being deployed to name Burnham in a supposed conspiracy of silence before any investigation has concluded anything. The Foghorn is not generating the anger in these towns. The Pits did that 40 years ago, and nothing replaced the work. The Foghorn is intercepting the anger, stripping it of the structural story that would explain it, and pointing it at whichever enemy is nearest to hand. Here is the part the people sounding the horn would rather you did not notice. Reform's energy policy aligns closely with the interests of the fossil fuel capital and networks that surround the wider political ecosystem it operates within. The party that told you the problem was a political class serving corporate interests over ordinary people is, on the question of who actually profits from its program, harder to tell apart from the thing it claims to oppose. The mechanism is different. The direction of the money looks much the same. The energy policy is the tell. It is worth watching who benefits when they think you are looking at something else. And there is a structural trap closing on them. Rage, once you have built a movement on it, has to be fed. And in a crowded field, someone can always bid higher. Restore Britain is now running to reform's right, with explicitly ethno-nationalist positioning in Makerfield. The right of centre vote is splitting three ways. And first past the post, the system the rearguard action has relied on for decades to lock out everyone it dislikes, is now the thing most likely to stop reform turning its vote share into seats. The instrument they trusted is doing to them precisely what it has done to the left for 40 years. I'm not going to pretend that it's justice. It is just a machine, working the way the machine works. Regardless of whose hand is on it this week. Third, the American scale. And then there is the scale this is all running toward, which is why I cannot leave it at the water's edge. In the United States this week, the Foghorn at institutional scale stopped drowning the signal and started removing the instruments that generate it. I mean that literally. The National Science Foundation has begun dismantling a deep ocean observation system, $368 million, built in 2016, designed to run for 25 years, around 900 instruments, anchored off Oregon and Washington and Alaska and North Carolina, and in the Erminger Sea, between Greenland and Iceland. They are sending ships to pull it out of the water. This is not the suppression of an inconvenient finding. It is the physical removal of the means by which the finding could ever be known. You cannot argue with data that no longer exists, because nobody is allowed to collect it. The pattern matters more than any single instance of it. In the same few days, congressional oversight of detention facilities was being blocked by legal obstruction and physical prevention. The new acting director of national intelligence is Bill Pulte, the federal housing finance chief. No intelligence background. Installed to replace Tulsi Gabbard. Those are the documented facts. That he has spent the past year filing criminal referrals against the president's political opponents is also documented. What you make of the appointment is an inference. And here is mine, offered as inference. It fits a pattern Peter Zeihan named cleanly, of isolating the president from anyone in the building who is smarter than he is. Hold that as a reading of the evidence, not as a fact in itself. But the evidence is not thin. This is not a digression from the British story. It is the British story's destination, if the correction mechanisms keep failing. The Foghorn at full institutional power does not merely make the public deaf and blind. It blinds the state's own instruments, so that even the people constitutionally responsible for seeing cannot see. So what actually works? What do you do about a foghorn? Not shout back. You cannot outshout it. That is the one game it is guaranteed to win, because noise is the medium it owns. You take away the thing it is feeding on. The foghorn works by finding a real grievance and attaching a false explanation to it. The grievance is the fuel. Remove the grievance, and the false explanation has nothing to burn. We have proof of this, close to home, and recent. When the ultra-low emission zone expanded across London, it was nearly derailed by a targeted disinformation campaign. But the campaign had something true to grip onto. The early design left real people genuinely exposed. The teacher, the care worker, the police officer, who bore the full cost of replacing a non-compliant car, while the very poorest got help and the comfortable were unaffected. That exclusion was real. And the false explanation laid over it, that the whole thing was ideological, a war on the motorist, found purchase, because the real grievance underneath it had been left unaddressed. The correction was not more evidence. London had the evidence already. The correction was fixing the sociology. When the scrappage scheme was expanded so that everyone affected could actually get help to comply, compliance climbed to around 97%. And the campaign lost its grip. Not because anyone won the argument. Because the legitimate grievance the lie was parasiting on had been dealt with. And a lie with nothing real underneath it is just noise. The data did not care about the political weather, once the sociology was sound. That took three things. Subnational institutions, agile enough to move faster than national politics. The political will to fix a structural exclusion, rather than defend the original design out of pride. And an information flow that did not leave the real material concerns sitting unanswered, while the disinformation rushed in to fill the silence. That is the work local government can do, that Westminster, on its current settings, cannot. And it is worth saying, with those Chorley Year 4s, and their by-election a few miles down the road, that the Greater Manchester mayoralty has operated closer to those conditions than almost anything available at national level. That is not a campaign point. It is structural evidence about what the constituency is actually being asked to choose between. For the higher stakes version, look at Moldova last September. Russia poured in, by President Sandu's account, hundreds of millions of euros. Vote buying, cyber attacks, bomb threats at diaspora polling stations, organised provocation. And the pro-European party won a parliamentary majority anyway. It did not win by outshouting the interference. It won through fast law enforcement, against the people breaking the law to manipulate the vote. Through persistent and patient counter-messaging. And through the European Union putting real material support into the country, well over €1 billion across the preceding years, so that the European choice was something people could feel in their own lives rather than a distant promise. Legitimacy compounds. Corruption corrodes. Moldova was outspent and outgunned, and it held. Because institutional credibility is a long-term asset that money cannot simply buy in a single campaign. That is the answer to the foghorn. Not a louder horn. Agile government that addresses the material conditions making people vulnerable to the lie. Plus institutional credibility, built up over years, until it is worth more than the noise. It is slower than rage. It is less satisfying than rage. It is the only thing that has ever actually worked. The honest close. I am not going to offer you optimism. Because optimism is not the same as hope. And you are owed the difference. What I can show you is that the foundations of the rage auction are quicksand. The movement is fragmenting under the weight of its own incentives. Restore Britain attacked Farage over the family's plea, not out of principle, but because it calculated that the grieving family's position was more useful than outbidding him on noise. That fragmentation is real. Its meaning is not the meaning it first appears to have, and the correction mechanism is not dead. This week, the House voted 215 to 208 to require congressional approval for further strikes on Iran. The first time such a measure has cleared the chamber on a final vote since the war began. It is a concurrent resolution. Its legal force is contested, and it still has to get through the Senate. Slim margins. Uncertain effect. Significant all the same. The oversight mechanism is not dead. It is fighting. Inside Delaney Hall, the detention facility in New Jersey, around 300 people on hunger strike wrote to senators and members of Congress. They cited the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments. They said they still believe justice would be done, under the law of a country they described as sovereign, constitutional, and respected the world over for upholding human rights. People held with no legal process, citing the constitutional protections of the country holding them, and still writing the letters. The foghorn at institutional scale produces exactly this, a situation in which the people who most need the oversight mechanism cannot be reached by the people responsible for it, and they are still writing the letters. The hope, such as it is not a feeling. It is structural. The window is open. It will not stay open on its own. And the people who stayed in the room, who did the slow, unglamorous work of fixing the grievance instead of shouting at the lie, who kept the instruments running when others were tearing them out of the water, will be the ones still standing there to build on what remains, when the noise finally drops. Evidently, the foghorn makes you deaf and blind, but legitimacy compounds. Stay in the room.